Next up is Hannah Lambert from Public Practice, who'll be talking about a new collaboration with the public sector. Hannah trained as an architect, but is now a public sector client and design advisor working on regeneration strategies, most recently at the London Legacy Development Corporation in East London. And she's one of the first cohort of Public Practice associates and is working with the London Borough of Newham as a senior regeneration manager. Hannah, over to you.
So I think I'm going to start to talk to you about the challenges of the resources in the public sector tonight, but also touch on why I think there's extraordinarily exciting opportunities, I think Dan's just touched on, and for future collaboration in the public sector, particularly right now, and how we can all potentially pull together to make some of these work. Let's make a pun. So there's a recognition across all the sectors that planning departments are under increasing pressures. And by planning, I really mean the whole sector of regeneration and placemaking. So on one hand, they've been managing with shrinking budgets, and on the other, net investment in planning and development has more than halved over the last 7 years or so. Planning has been harder hit proportionally than any other local authority service, and it's the non-statutory functions that have suffered the most. So one measure of this, for example, is that across the country, almost half of all authorities have no in-house design expertise. And on the other hand, planning departments are now being asked to take on new responsibilities. But perhaps these new responsibilities also bring new opportunities. For example, many of you have seen, and we've touched on a few little examples this evening already, of where there's an inspiring new generation of council-led housing delivery programmes from enterprising authorities, not just in London, but across the UK. And these authorities are really now looking to build their capacity for a bit more proactive planning. Also, until recently, the biggest barrier authorities faced to building their planning capacity was funding. And whilst that's clearly still a massive issue, the uplift in planning fees and intelligent use of planning performance agreements and delivery funding are really starting to make it possible for planning departments to recruit again. So in the East of England, the biggest challenge, that they've now faced is finding and keeping the right people. In the East of England region alone, there are 115 planning vacancies at the last count, spending nearly £1 million a year just on recruitment. And I notice I've been at Newham for nearly 3 weeks now, so I'm brand new in the role, but in my new team I've counted that over a third of the directorate are vacant temporary or agency posts, and that's just on a kind of rough estimate. So churn or short-term pressures means more expensive agency or short-term staff and continual loss of local knowledge, continuity and accountability. So Public Practice have spearheaded an alternative model to access talented and experienced practitioners at a lower cost. And I'm one of them. So I'm part of the first cohort of 18 associates, these kind of guinea pigs, placed in boroughs across London and in the surrounding areas. So we're stretching from St Albans via TfL, got friends now in OPDC, in Westminster, in Tower Hamlets, and stretching out as far as, I think, Epping Forest, maybe even to Cambridge. So we're a little bit beyond London even in this first group. And there we are. So some of the authorities are using us to plug the gap, and some to set up new design review panels, for example, and some to test having in-house design support for the first time in many, many years. So we think this is a real chance to be bold and be enterprising and maybe start to take some risks. That's what we're pitching. So we'll also be shaping and researching and learning together over the next 12 months to make stronger borough networks and to share knowledge. So this idea is to also bridge the gap between skills to make working together easier and bringing kind of hope, building new opportunities in the way the public sector collaborates with the private sector and with smaller firms. The relationship, I think, as Russell touched on, with the private sector, can be sometimes corrosive, and I think there's examples where too often sometimes you do still see the biggest players getting the biggest contracts and taking advantage or not being as productive. And we've really got to find the right balance within city planning to let both sides thrive and to really start making productive relationships. So with Public Practice and with the group, we'll be looking at how we can work together to better add value to built environment projects and really test new ideas for the city. I'm fast. This was a fish and chip dinner in Dewsbury in a market at night. Halal, to bridge the community gaps. So, and this is a temporary community centre in Hackney Wick, using old cabins from the games. So, I wasn't going to talk about my projects. In the way I work, I think that touches on, I think, really commissioning the big with the small is super important, that regeneration must be tackled at all scales. I think sometimes politics really often comes into play when we're trying to generate projects, and those small pieces of research, cultural studies, temporary uses and gatherings are not just about programming spaces or creating reports for their own sake. I think they're a really good tool to build consensus by providing good evidence. And I think there's a particularly strong role for small firms to get involved in that. It's something that's easy to get involved in, that we can do quite cheaply and quite small, and we can advertise in less onerous ways. And I think the current, in London, emerging mayoral policy means that there's set to be an increased demand in things like design review panels, which is a great way of getting practitioners to build relationships with both planners and peers. And programmes such as the GLA Small Sites programme will demand new partnerships and engagement and funding methods. So really, if you're bidding for work, some top tips, I think, for my final few slides. So we've heard it already this evening, but do team up together. I think offer something different, and it becomes really easy to give people full marks because you almost can't mark them down. And things like the new architecture and urbanism framework will be used really heavily by the boroughs. So if you're not on it, team up with the firms that are, and same for those big engineering firms as well. I think you can show the benefit to them and add value. I talk about adding value a lot, but it's a cross-cutting public sector theme, and I think it doesn't mean giving away loads of time for free, but it does mean thinking strategic, thinking creatively, you know, offer a 2-hour study tour to a community group or a critical friends section around a workstage that's really only 1 or 2 hours extra, but that can really kind of, again, get you extra marks in those boxes that are rather tedious. And really, yeah, be concise, unlike me. And, you know, we want to read a magazine, not a PhD, particularly given those resource limitations I've outlined. And that, the public sector is complex, but I think that is where the richness of these opportunities does lie. And I think it's actually really hard to find that in many other places. So it's really exciting.